Welcome to the Starting Well podcast. Whether you are a new pastor or you're beginning to serve in a new church, this podcast is designed to help you start well. I'm your host, Jason Lowe, and I serve as a regional consultant with the Kentucky Baptist Convention. And I am so glad that you've joined us for this episode. Let's get started. Okay, so I want to start today's episode with a quick fictional story about a pastor, let's call him Mark. When Mark began his ministry at his new church, he was ready to lead. I mean, he had the vision, the sermons mapped out for the first 6 months, a new small group strategy, even plans to freshen up the website. I mean, he had a plan. He came in with energy, ready to help the church grow. But every Sunday, there was this one thing that Mark couldn't ignore. An older woman, Mrs. Henley, came in just before the service started every week. And she always sat in the same place, in the third row by the window, always alone. And right after the closing prayer, she was gone. No chit-chat, no coffee, no fellowship after the service, just in and out every single week. A few months into his pastorate, Mark finally asked someone about it. It was really bothering him. He said, "Hey, is Mrs. Henley okay?" And the member answered, "Yeah, but she's just still grieving. Her husband sat beside her for 52 years. In the same seat on the same pew every Sunday. But he passed away last winter, and she really hasn't talked to many people since then." And that just hit Mark hard. Because in that moment, he realized something. He had come to lead a church. He was ready to lead a church, but he hadn't yet learned the church or its people. He hadn't learned their stories. He hadn't learned their rhythms. He hadn't learned their wounds. He hadn't learned the church's history or its culture. To be honest, he really hadn't learned anything about the church at all. And so the following Sunday, instead of preaching the next part of his pre-planned sermon series, Mark stood up and said, "Before I can lead you, I need to know you. And so I want to learn your stories, and I want to learn all about our church." And you know what happened? That day, for the first time, Mrs. Henley stayed after the service for coffee and fellowship. So here's what we want to talk about today. 7 essential details that every pastor should learn about their church during the first year so that you don't miss the Mrs. Henleys in your congregation. You see, before you cast vision, before you make changes, before you try to lead, you've got to take the time to learn. Leadership expert, guru, everybody knows him. When you think of leadership, you think about John C. Maxwell. And one of the things that John Maxwell said is that to be effective, leaders must always be learners. Former President JFK once declared, "Leadership and learning are indispensable to each other." And if that one doesn't work for you, Jesus also talked about the value of learning in Matthew chapter 11, verse 29, when he said, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." These quotes each communicate a simple truth, and that truth is this: leaders are learners. And so if you're a pastor, here are the 7 essential details that you've got to learn about your church during the first year. And so let's go ahead and dive right in. Number 1, the first thing you need to learn about your church during your first year serving as their pastor is you need to learn about your church's history. You need to learn about its history. You have to do everything you can to learn about the history of that church, because that church most likely existed long before you ever became its pastor. And so you've got to understand what's happened in the church's past if you're going to effectively lead in the church's present and its future. And this is going to take time. This is not something that happens overnight. It's not just going to take a little time. It's going to take a lot of time. Because you're going to want to talk to a lot of the longtime members to learn about them and to learn about the history of the church. If you didn't listen to the last episode, we talked about how you are to love well. And one of the first recommendations for how to love your people well was I recommended that you conduct what we call get to know you visits. And you're just learning about the church member and you're learning about their past in the church. And so if you go to startingwell.net and you click on the resources tab, there's a link to a document with several questions that can help you learn not only about the stories of your church members, but also will help you learn the history of the church. And so you've got to take the time to learn about your church's history, and the best way to do that is simply to listen to long-term members. Learn their stories, learn about their experiences at the church, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And if they've been a member there for a long time, they can tell you all about each of those. But other ways to learn about the church's history are also available. For example, you can locate and review any old church directories because most churches have those. It's not as common today, but a lot of churches, especially in their past, would have a directory where you would have pictures of each and every family that was a member of that church during that time. And they'll also have pictures of events and Christmas pageants and Easter plays, all these things that the church has done in the past that will show up in those directories. So find an old church directory if you have one and look at it. You can look at old bulletins and you can kind of look and see what were some of the announcements in those bulletins to kind of give you an idea of the church's history. You can review the minutes from past business meetings. Now, some of you are thinking, that's a good way to take a nap if I began to do that. And that's fine, but maybe you want to read some of those past business meeting minutes and learn about some of the decisions that were made, learn if there was any contentious business meetings in the past. Maybe you want to review any documents or resources specifically focused on the church's history. Some churches have a historical committee, and it's their job to collect artifacts from the church's past in order to inform future pastors and future generations about the church. So maybe you have an actual documented history of your church. If you do, that thing is going to be a gold mine. So find it, read it, and learn from it. Maybe you want to listen to some old sermons from previous pastors. Depending on how old your church is, you may find cassette tapes. You may find CDs, or you may find sermons online from past pastors that you can listen to just to get a feel for the types of sermons that the church was exposed to in the past. Have they ever had a pastor who preached expository sermons? Or have they had pastors who were much more topical in their approach? So listening to old sermons will help you inform your understanding of the church's history. Maybe you want to read some old news stories about the church in the local newspaper, or maybe your state denominational paper, or whatever you can find about the church. And that may be very positive, telling about a church building program, or maybe it can tell you about something else in the church, maybe some difficult days that the church had. Maybe the church burned to the ground. I know of churches certainly that's happened. Pray that it hasn't happened in your church, but just in case it has, you can read about it. If you have any former pastors that are still living, you can talk to them and you can find out their thoughts on the church and their stories and their experiences. That would go such a long way in helping you understand the church's history. And as you conduct your study of the church's history, think about some of these questions. What are some of the church's most significant or defining moments in its past? What were some of the high marks and what were some of the low marks in the church's past? What are some of its most painful circumstances? Has the church experienced a split in its past or financial difficulties in its past? What are some of its most painful experiences? When was the church founded and what circumstances led to its founding? Was your church founded because a church planter came and had a vision for that community and planted that church through the blessing of another church? Or was your church founded because they couldn't get along with folks at another church and so they became New Harmony Baptist Church rather than Harmony Baptist Church, or Second Baptist Church instead of First Baptist Church, all because there was some type of split that took place in the church's past? That's very helpful information for you to know. You may also want to think about how many pastors have served the church throughout its existence. And how did most of those former pastors end their ministries? Did they have long tenures? Did they have short tenures? Did they have good experiences or very negative experiences? Did they leave on their own terms or were they asked to leave? These are details that will be very helpful for you as you move forward. You may want to try to find some of that out even before you become the church's pastor. But if you don't know that and you've already begun to serve, that's certainly some things you want to know about now, is you want to kind of know the experience of any former pastors. These are just a few questions to consider as you seek to learn everything you can about what God has accomplished in the church's past to inform what He might lead you to do in the church's future. So when you think about the details that you need to learn during your first year as the church's pastor, number one, learn about your church's history. Number two, you also need to learn about your church's culture. You see, every church culture is unique. Every church has their own way of doing things and making decisions. Every church has their own set of core values. Every church even has their own quirks. Every church has a unique church culture. I have been in many churches in my ministry. Especially as a regional consultant, I'm in a different church just about every Sunday, and every church is different. For example, let's just think about what some churches have called the designated fellowship time. Or maybe they call it the meet and greet time. Or maybe they call it the handshake time. Or in one church, they called it the hugging and loving time. But some type of moment designated in the service where everybody just greets one another. And by the way, just the different names that churches call this reveals the different cultures. And so some churches don't have a designated fellowship time. They don't have that hugging and loving time. And then in other churches, they have an extended greeting time. Maybe it lasts a few seconds. Maybe it lasts a minute. Or I once attended a church that wasn't a large church, but they had an 11-minute greeting time for a church of about 30. And so you could literally have a conversation with everybody else in the church during those 11 minutes. You see, this is just one example of the different church cultures that you'll find. But every aspect of church life will have its own unique flavor at your church. And it will be different from church to church to church. So unless you were a member of the church that you're now pastoring, before you became the pastor, you're probably going to find some of their culture to be different from what you're used to. But don't sweat it. That's okay. That's completely normal. However, when you discover those cultural characteristics that differ from your own, you need to understand that that doesn't make them wrong. It doesn't make them inferior to yours. It just makes them different. And unless the church openly tolerates sin or openly tolerates other things that are contrary to God's word, your goal should not be to change their culture to match your own, especially at first. Instead, your goal should be to identify the specific characteristics of that culture so that you can lead effectively within it. Again, this takes a lot of time, and this takes humility. That's why it takes time to love well, as we talked about in the previous episode, and also to learn well. But in time, you might be able to change the congregational culture, but that certainly doesn't happen at the beginning. It certainly doesn't happen during the first year. Your goal at first is simply to learn the culture, not to transform it. You may be able to do that later on. By the way, there's a good book on this particular subject by Aubrey Malphurs. It's called Look Before You Lead. And it's all about learning and shaping your church's culture. And so it's been out for a while, but this might be a good resource for you. So you might want to check that one out if you need to learn more about how to identify and lead within a church's culture. And so we're thinking through 7 essential details that you need to learn during the first year as you serve as a church's pastor. Number 1, learn about your church's history. Number 2, learn about your church's culture. And now, number 3, you also need to learn about your church's community. You need to become a student of the community that you're trying to reach. And the best way to do so is to think like a missionary and to absolutely immerse yourself in the community. There's no better way to learn it than to immerse yourself in it. Another good book recommendation for you is called Reclaiming Glory by Mark Clifton. And in that book, he talks about exegeting your community. And he offers several ways to do so in the book. And I'm going to share several of those with you. But again, you may want to check that book out. It's a great book talking about some of these things we're talking about today. But here's some ways to learn about your church's community that Mark Clifton offers. You should attend community meetings that take place in your community. You should try to volunteer to serve in the community in some way. Or maybe you shop regularly within the community. You go to the same shops and same stores on a regular basis. Get your hair cut by the same barber at the same time each month. For some of you, that one will work. For someone like me who doesn't have a lot of hair, that's probably not going to work for me. But if you do go to the barbershop, talk to the men in the barbershop, because it's likely a lot of them are in there pretty regularly, and find out their thoughts about the community and some of the things that happen in the community, even the community's past. You talk about the church's history, your community also has a history, and these are going to be some good resources for you to inform you about the community's past. Same goes for coffee shops or dry cleaners or cafes or grocery stores. You can go to frequent these locations and these businesses on a regular basis and just talk to people. And you will begin to learn about your church's community very quickly. Maybe you want to volunteer at a local school, or you want to coach youth sports, or join a softball team or a bowling league. Maybe you want to volunteer to ride along with the local police in your community. These are all ways that are designed to help you learn about the community. And so maybe you use one of these, or maybe you find another way to learn about the community. But whatever you do, just find those ways, identify those ways to learn about the community that your church is called to reach. And so as you do so, begin to identify some of the needs in the community that your church can meet. So that's where I would recommend that you start learning about your church's community. There are other ways, and these are helpful as well. You probably want to obtain a demographic report from a reputable company to identify population trends and other helpful information like that. If you are pastoring a Southern Baptist church, the North American Mission Board can provide this report for you, and I'll put the link to that in the show notes. But if you serve as a pastor in a KBC church, then I would recommend that you contact your regional consultant to assist you. If you're in my region, I will be glad to provide that report for you. If you're serving in another part of the state, contact your regional consultant, and they can provide this for you because it'll tell you a lot of things about the community. So as you begin serving as a pastor in your church, Number 1, learn about your church's history. Number 2, learn about your church's culture. Number 3, learn about your church's community. But then number 4, you'll also want to learn about your church's governing documents and policies. Now, for some of you listening, you were with me until right now. Because let's be honest, some of you would probably rather get a root canal than read through your church's constitution and bylaws. This may not be your favorite recommendation, but I'm here to tell you, if you want to learn well, you need to set aside time to study your church's governing documents. So pick an afternoon or even a whole day, depending on the number of documents that you have, and review every document that you can find. Or if you've got a ministry assistant, have them assemble these documents for you. And so here's some potential documents that you need to look at. Your church's constitution and bylaws. Absolutely, you need to review those things. If you've got any personnel policies and procedures, those are going to be helpful for you to review. Any facility use policies that you have, wedding policies, hiring policies, child protection policies, any financial policies that you have. If you have any job descriptions for different roles in the church, both paid and volunteer. You're going to want to read your statement of faith and any other policies or documents that you can find. And by the way, you may find that your church does not have one or more of these documents. If that's the case, make a note of those things for future reference and probably something that you need to work on in the future. But for now, just make a note of those that you don't have. But you'll also probably find areas that are in need of revision of the documents that you do have. And again, right now is not the time to make those changes. You're just making note of those items for now. You'll have plenty of time to make those changes later. The purpose of this review is simply to familiarize yourself with these documents in their current form. Again, these activities may not seem spiritual, but they are absolutely necessary, especially if you introduce changes that violate one or more of these documents. You will certainly wish that you had taken the time to review them beforehand. So you may hate this recommendation right now, but you can thank me later. Okay? All right. Number 1, as we think about the different details that you need to learn as the church's pastor during your first year, number 1, learn about your church's history. Number 2, learn about your church's culture. Number 3, learn about your church's community. Number 4, learn about your church's governing documents and policies. And then number 5, you need to learn about your church's influencers. You see, every church has both official and unofficial leaders. The official leaders, of course, are easier to identify because they usually come with titles. They may serve as deacons, they may serve as elders, they may serve as Sunday school teachers or ministry team leaders or various other roles. So they're going to be easier to identify. However, you also want to learn about those unofficial leaders, these influencers in the church, and they come in 2 categories. The first are those individuals who don't necessarily hold a title, but are often well respected within the church. Other people frequently want to know what these individuals think about a certain matter before they form their own opinion. These individuals have the potential to help you implement change in later years, but they can also become significant roadblocks if they're opposed to your change. Therefore, you need to identify these unofficial leaders during your first year because that will help you as you lead later on. So that's the first category of influencers. A second category are those who will attempt to get their own way no matter the cost and no matter what you say as the pastor. They may attempt bully tactics or other ways to manipulate church members to accomplish their goals. And so you certainly need to know who those people are as well. So again, we're talking about 7 essential details that you need to learn about your church during your first year that will help you lead well later on. So number 1, learn about your church's history. Number 2, learn about your church's culture. Number 3, learn about your church's community. Number 4, learn about your church's governing documents and policies. Number 5, learn about your church's influencers. And number 6, learn about your church's current reality. You see, understanding the church's current reality will be absolutely critical to discerning God's vision for the church's future. Therefore, you need to review your church's records or request a report from your denominational office to identify trends in key metrics. You need to look at the trends of your average worship attendance. You need to look at trends for baptisms and small group attendance, your finances, your membership trends, whether you're having a lot of transfers in or out, and any other metrics, by the way, that you deem that are necessary. But you need to identify any trends. And you need to know any of those observations and talk with other church leaders to help you identify the stories behind the numbers. You may or may not know the reason why your average of worship attendance has been in a steady decline, or maybe even a steady increase. So what do the numbers tell you about your church's current reality? Is your church currently in a growth cycle? Or is it plateaued? Or is it in maintenance mode? Or maybe it's even in a death spiral. The reality is that the church will die unless significant changes are made. You see, identifying your church's current reality is a critical component that you'll need to know before you can effectively lead the church. And if you're pastoring a KBC church, your regional consultant is going to be a great resource to help you in this area. We have several resources that can help. But you can also go to startingwell.net, click on the resources tab, and there you can find a link to a simple document with questions to assist you and some of your fellow church leaders in a quick assessment of your church's current reality. But again, your regional consultant will help you immensely in this area if you are a member of a KBC church. If not, check with your denominational office or your local association. Maybe that can help you in this area if you don't have those numbers yourself. All right, so we've talked about 6 so far, 6 essential details that you need to learn during your first year as a church's pastor, and now we only have 1 left. Finally, you need to learn about the changes that you need to make in the future, but not right now. You see, based on your observations in the previous 6 categories, when you look at the church's history and its culture and its community and its documents and its influencers and its current reality, you will undoubtedly identify areas that need improvement or change. And so what you want to do right now is you want to make a list of those areas, but you don't want to act on them during your first year unless it is absolutely necessary. And by the way, the list of absolutely necessary changes is actually quite small. In fact, we'll talk more about that list in a future episode. Instead, what you want to do right now is just review that list often, and you want to pray through it on a regular basis, and you want to ask the Lord for wisdom in determining the right time to implement those strategic changes. And also begin having informal conversations with other church leaders and influencers to hear their thoughts and potential solutions. You're gathering information, but don't make the changes until you have gained the congregation's trust, because only then can you lead well. So there you have it. 7 essential details that you need to learn about your church during your first year as their pastor. Now, you'll certainly learn other things about the church, but these are essential if you want to start well. And after all, that's the goal, right? Hey, thanks again for listening to this episode. I hope you're finding value in this podcast. And if you are, make sure that you subscribe to the podcast in your podcasting app of choice, because that way you'll know every time that a new episode is released. And also, we would so appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star rating and write a brief review, because that helps other pastors discover this podcast as well. So until next time, may you shepherd the flock of God among you well. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Starting Well podcast. For more resources, please visit us online at startingwell.net. For more information about the Kentucky Baptist Convention, go to kybaptist.org.